Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We are here. It is 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm so glad you are here. As you come in, please say hello in the chat. And if you feel so comfortable, let us know where you are coming from. As homeschoolers, you know, we're all over the world. So we would love to know where you're coming from. If you want to say that in the chat, it is open. In the meantime, we are going to get started because we get things in on time. We get in and out. So hello, it looks like we have people from New Jersey. Oh, that's you, Brian.
That's me. I figured I'd kick us off.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. All right. All right. Well, I will say hello to everyone in as I see things in the chat, but I'm going to get us going so we can get started to get this good information about writing and literature. So first, I'd like to welcome everyone to the first of our 4 live expert sessions for World Homeschoolers Day 2023. Today's session is brought to you by WriteAtHome. So I would like to first introduce myself as well as well, you're not even our guest. You are our deliverer, our person. You're going to share all your wisdom with us today.
My best.
So hi, everyone. I'm Camille Kirksey. I'm the founder of World Homeschoolers Day. I am also your host today. I'm a homeschool mom of 3. We've been homeschooling since 2013, and I am a homeschool expert and mindset coach. And I love to support the homeschooling community with this holiday that I started in 2021, as well as the free events and all the things that I love to do to support us homeschoolers. And then we have Brian Wasko from WriteAtHome, an online provider of writing, literature, and history courses, combined with tutoring for students grades 4 through 12. So today, Brian is going to talk to us about 3 effective techniques for teaching writing and literature. He's going to do 3 for each topic. So it's really 6. You're getting some bonus information here today. So before we get started, I am going to ask everyone a question. We want to know, what part of teaching writing is the most difficult for you? As answers come in, I can share just with me. I remember being a student and having things to say, but always worrying about how the rules. And so I had that fear with my children. Like I'm a pretty good writer. I've written a book and I write blogs and things, but I wanted to make sure that they felt like their voice was important. And that was really intimidating because the rules do matter, but it's like, well, how do you do that? And I know you're going to talk to us about that because WriteAtHome is the perfect solution to that problem. All right, Sabrina says, my 13-year-old just isn't interested in reading and writing. He would rather be engineering and building with his hands. That is a real situation. Absolutely, that interest isn't there. And I'm sure you'll talk about that too, Brian, because that's something we'll talk about before.
There's a name for that condition.
Wow.
Yes, it's called being
a normal.
It's called being a normal boy. That's what that is.
I think you're about right. That's probably about right.
That's the problem you have, Sabrina. You have a normal boy.
2 different parts of the brain too. Barbara says the most difficult is my daughter doesn't like writing at all. She can definitely expound on her composition. Absolutely. Yeah, the physical, sometimes just that physical, because we're in a digital world, that physical requirement, or just not knowing what to say because they want to get it right. There's a lot of things. Yeah, so those are 2 absolutely common things. So don't feel like you're alone, like your kids are different. Like Brian said, this is just normal behavior. Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you for participating, Sabrina and Barbara, and putting it in the Q&A. I don't know what's up with the chat. So we are actually going to get started. So Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you for you to share our first portion of the discussion.
Great. Thanks so much, Camille, for inviting us to be a part of World Homeschooler Day and to be a part of this webinar. It really is a thrill. And thanks everybody who's here. Thanks for taking your time to be here and listen to what we have to say. I hope this will be a fruitful time for you. I trust that I'll have something valuable to share. Let me just begin by talking about these 2 questions because they are related, right? Both are basically concerned with the idea of motivation, right? This is just a perennial problem with education, right? It's getting students to be interested in things, to take ownership of their education. It's wonderful when our kids take natural interest in subjects and pursue study. But that's just frankly not always the case. There are always going to be particular subjects, and in some cases, just education in general is a struggle for kids, and it's difficult to find ways to motivate them. And all I can say is this, that there's no educator anywhere that doesn't struggle with this idea. All of us who are teachers know this fact, and that's that motivated, interested students are the easiest to teach. It takes no skill at all to teach students who are already interested in the subject, right? They're just a joy, especially in a world today where there's instant access to information in our pockets. If you have a student who's interested in a topic or a subject, you don't have to do anything but just set them loose to go study it, right? So every single teacher, professional teacher and home educator alike, struggle with the idea that I have to motivate my students, to enjoy and be engaged with the thing I'm teaching. And so that's not an answer. That's not a solution for you. It's just sort of empathy with you. Just need to know you're not in a weird place. Everybody deals with this. And I'll say this too, that professional educators are at a disadvantage in this area to you as parents. Parent educators have an instinctive advantage over educators because you know your children better than we ever will. You are closer to them than we ever will, and you frankly care about them more than we ever will. And as a result, I'm not saying the answer is easy, but I'm saying that you have a better chance of getting that out of your student than a professional educator does, right? You know what works best for your kids. And typically it's finding that balance between encouragement, support, concern, affection, sympathy, that side, and discipline and structure and leadership and that kind of thing, right? I've always said it's that being a good educator often is deciding when a student needs an arm around the shoulder and a hug and a glass of milk and some cookies, and when the student needs a kick in the butt and to get his Game Boy taken away from him. Do they still have Game Boys? I don't even know what they have. And it's that balance between just encouragement and sympathy and just correction and discipline is always the challenge of every parent. But who knows better than your own mom, your own dad, about these things. And I'd be really frank with your kids. Listen, learning is easy if you're into it, and I want you to be into it. But if you're not into it, it's still stuff that has to be done, right? Part of learning and growing is learning to communicate verbally and to communicate in writing. And real education comes through reading and reading well. And I'm sorry, it's not a real passion and an interest, but it's something we have to give ourselves to. I'd rather you love it, right? But if you don't love it, we still have to do it. So, and then do what you can to make it a pleasant experience for them, right? Don't dismiss that, right? Find ways to make it comfortable and exciting and interesting. Share your own interests with them, read with them, show them yourself writing, that kind of thing. Do the best you can to encourage them. But just understand that sometimes it just doesn't happen, and that's just the way it is. All right, that's my advice on that. Let me jump into the 3 topics, or my 3 points. I'm going to try to go quickly through them since I spent some time on that question. Camille, cut me off if you need to, okay? I can ramble. So I've got 3 points. I could do more than 3, but I'm going to limit it to 3 that I think are the most helpful ideas I want to share with you. As someone who's taught English writing and literature for my entire adult life, which stretches back to the late 1980s. I've been teaching for decades and have lots of experience in this, and in particular in the area of teaching writing. I've got 3 things for you that every educator should know. And this is not a pitch for WriteAtHome. These are principles that we understand at WriteAtHome. These are principles that WriteAtHome embraces in the way we work with students, but they are principles that work in the home regardless. The first is sufficient. Well, let me list them for you. One is sufficient practice. The second is effective coaching, and the third one is a focus on the process of writing. So these are the three things I'm going to talk about briefly about effective teaching of writing: is sufficient practice, effective coaching, and a focus on the process. So let me talk about those first two, sufficient practice and effective coaching, because they're connected. And the simple point here, and this is not some sort of brilliant revelation, I think this is pretty much common sense, but growing as a writer, becoming better at putting words on the page is very similar. It's a craft, right? This is an art that is developed the same way all arts are developed, the same way any musical skill is developed, the same way any athletic skill is developed. It's dependent on those first two principles I talked about: practice and coaching. Those are the two things that we need if we want to get better at almost anything that involves talent and skill. So if your student comes to you and says, she's just desperate to learn how to play the tuba, okay, what do? Well, you buy a tuba. That's a start. Rent a tuba might be smarter, actually, than I think about it. But you acquire a tuba somehow, and then you acquire a tuba instructor. You find somebody who knows how to play the tuba. Okay. And what that person will do is will teach some basic principles and then give your student practice. They will have tuba skills to develop, and they will have to practice over time. And you will have the joy of listening to the tuba all day long while your student practices, right? Then that coach will meet with them periodically, once a week or whatever. And that coach, that teacher will listen to your daughter play the tuba, and then we'll advise them on how they're doing and suggest ways that they can improve it, right? This is the basic way we learn anything: music skills, athletic skills, and writing skills. And we all know the same thing. If you don't practice, if you don't give yourself to playing the instrument or to, performing the athletic task or whatever it is, you don't see growth that everybody understands. We get better at sports, we get better at music by practice. And that's just the case with writing. Absolutely 100%. There's no avoiding this. In order for students to develop effective writing skills, they have to write, and they have to write regularly. They have to write consistently. We have to give them sufficient practice in order for them to grow as writers. Now, there's balance here, right? Because we often come across situations like students in the chat here, the questions that were asked. What do you do when your student isn't motivated to write, right? And writing is a chore and a task and difficult for them. Well, you don't want to overburden them either, right? If it becomes just this onerous task, then you're probably overdoing it. So you need to find that sweet spot where students are writing enough, engaging in the process of writing enough that they're developing the skills, but not so much of a demand that they're being discouraged and frustrated, right? So I'm not saying unlimited amounts of writing. I've come across homeschooling parents who have had their kids write an essay every week. This has happened a number of times over the years. The kids get to high school, and part of their English is they have to write an essay every week, typically something like a 5-paragraph essay. Honestly, I think that's just asking too much. I think that's overkill. I think it's absolutely unnecessary. No student in a classroom certainly is able to write an entire essay every single week. It's just asking too much, I think, of most students. Now, you may have an exceptional kid. You may have a kid who that's easy peasy, and writing an essay is something they could do in a few minutes. So again, it depends on your student, but you need to find that sweet spot. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the process thing. The coaching is the next thing, right? It's not enough that students are just writing. Students need to hear from somebody who knows more about writing than they do, right? They need somebody responding to their writing. They need somebody who can read it, who knows. They don't have to be experts, right? They don't have to be professional writers themselves, but they need to know enough to spot mistakes and to encourage them to correct them, and to identify, this is even more important, and identify the positives in what they're doing and to point those out. One of the principles at WriteAtHome that we find really important, by the way, our writing teachers are called coaches at WriteAtHome intentionally. We're calling them writing coaches, because we love that idea of that awesome middle school or I'm sorry, like little league baseball coach, right? Who loves kids and puts his arm around them and encourages them when they strike out and gives them good advice and reminds them all the time that baseball is fun and the kids love them and respond to it. That's what we want in a writing coach, somebody who's positive and optimistic and believes in kids. So my strong encouragement is to resist the temptation to harshly correct everything when you give students writing. Coaching student writing isn't just finding mistakes and making your students fix them. That's part of it. You're going to be correcting mistakes, absolutely. But it's equally important that you find what your students are doing well and you point that out to them every single time. Gosh, I love this character that you developed. I love the way you put this. This verb is really strong. I love that one right there. This part of your essay really made me laugh. It was so creative. Those kinds of things are going to, over time, begin to encourage your student and help them believe that they can become good writers. So coaching, good coaching is not just about correction, although that's important. It's also about encouraging and pointing out the good things. Okay, that's a very vital part of excellent coaching. Okay, I'm going to move on. There's lots more I could say about coaching. I'm just going to get to the third point real quick, which is to focus on the process. So when I was a student, and this is probably the case with many of you, and in schools, I'd be assigned papers, and I would write the paper and submit the paper to a teacher. And then a couple weeks later, we'd get those papers back, and they would have a grade in the corner, and usually a bunch of written marks in the margins and that kind of thing, and stuff circled and outlined and that kind of junk, usually in red ink, right? And here's what I would do. I was like most students, is I would get the paper and see all the notes, and I wouldn't read them. I would read the grade in the corner, and then I'd put the paper away. And I remember how frustrating that was to teachers, that we didn't pay any attention to the notes that they put on the page. Obviously, it took the teacher a lot of time to include those notes. But the reason I didn't pay much attention to them, I'm convinced of this, is that it was too late. I already had the grade. There was nothing I could do about these comments that this teacher had made on the paper. And I know if I was smart, I'd read them and remember them for some future paper and that kind of thing. But it just felt like it was a bunch of criticism of stuff that I've already done now that it was too late to do anything about it. So I've come to believe that approach to teaching writing isn't really teaching writing. It's really just evaluating writing. It's just telling a student how well they're writing. And that's really not the point of assigning papers to students in middle and high school. The point is to help them develop their skills as writers, not to assess whether they already are a good writer. That's where writing as a process comes in. That's a really important factor, right? So most educators will talk about the writing process. There's pre-writing, all the things we do to get ready to write. Then it might involve outlining or note-taking or free writing and all kinds of cool techniques. Might be interviewing somebody or doing some reading and research. But anything you do to get ready to write is called pre-writing. The first step of the process after that then is composition or drafting. The first draft is the next step in the process. We have to get kids used to the idea that writing comes in stages, and a first draft is just a first draft. It's not the final draft. Get students to just get something down on paper, not feel like they have to perfect it, not feel like this is one and done, that once I finish the last word of this essay, I'm done with it. This is just a first draft, because then your job is to read that draft and coach your student. Okay, I see what you did here. Here's how we can make this better. Oh, by the way, this part's already great. Keep that the same. But here's some things we can do to improve this paper. I want you to go back and revise it and resubmit it. Second draft, or revising, right? At WriteAtHome, we then do a third draft every time. And I love this technique. After they do a revision of that assignment, then I'm going to look at it as sort of a finished product, but needing some fine-tooth comb work. Right? This is when we look for the proofreading stuff, that we really pay attention to the grammar and the spelling and all the little details. And then we mark those up as carefully as we can and have the student do a final revision and a final draft, so that they get used to the idea of 3 drafts for every paper. And the point isn't just that they do work over and over, but that they learn that nobody gets papers right the first time. There's always, all good writers go back and revise and proofread their work. And it's that process of working alongside them through these drafts where you see growth in student writing. This is the process that I discovered 20 some years ago working with homeschool kids. I would do exactly this. I'd give them a draft one week, I'd mark it up, return it to them the next week, and their assignment was to revise and resubmit it. And then we did it one more time with sort of a proofreading approach, and then they submit a final draft, and I wouldn't grade anything until that final draft. I'd coach them 2 times through drafts before I give them a final grade. So that it's not about the grade, it's about the process and developing the ability to improve your own writing, okay? And engaging students in that process. All right. Those are my quick summary 3 points for teaching writing. Sufficient practice, and sufficient depends on your student and your situation, right? I like a draft a week. That works for most kids. Not a final paper a week, a draft. So it takes 3 weeks to finish it. Effective coaching. We talked a little bit about that. And then the third one is a focus on the process.
You said so many good things, Brian. Like
Okay.
it's been, I took so many notes, but I just want to point out a few things that really stood out to me, and to see if, people watching, it resonated with them too. First of all, one of my favorite this is random, but it makes sense. Allen Iverson quotes, we talk about practice. Not talking about, we talk about practice. That's what immediately came to mind.
Well, I'm from South Jersey, so I am a Philadelphia 76ers, a heartbroken 76ers fan, because they just played awful again and got knocked out again. But so I'm a big fan of Allen Iverson.
Yeah. I mean, it's the best advice as far as any process. But you got to practice. I mean, he wasn't talking about him practicing, but
No,
the sentiments to say.
he was disparaging practice. So I'm
yeah. So practice, coaching, finding that sweet spot of not too much, but enough. Resisting harsh correction, find out what they're doing well. Iteration, the process is the point, not the final result. I hope these things are resonating with our viewers, that those are things that pointed out to me. It looks like we have someone in the chat. I'm a college level English professor who uses the coaching method in the classroom. Somehow I find myself struggling to translate this for my 9-year-old. Any tips? So anonymous, you didn't put your name. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end of the conversation. So we're going to come back to your question, because that's a great question. How to take what we feel is right, what we're learning, and apply it. So absolutely, that's a great question.
Yeah.
All right, we have another question before we go into the 3 tips for literature, teaching literature. I have a question that I'm going to put in the chat, and remember, we don't have a chat, but we do have that Q&A section, so you can put that there. But the question is, how do you choose what books and works of literature your child will read or your student will read? I'm going to put that in the chat so you can see it. And feel free to put your response in the Q&A. How do you choose what books and works of literature your student will read? I can tell you my process is very whatever I find at the library. A lot of times, sometimes I have a plan, most times I don't, but it seems to all work out. Absolutely. So I would love to know what others think. I like to look at lots of lists too, but there's so many lists. So many things out there to choose from. But we'll see what other people have to say before we go into the second half of the conversation. Those were really good tips, Brian. Very good. And practical too. It wasn't, sometimes when you think of writing, it can feel it's so important. It is, but it can feel so heavy. But those are doable. Let's see, Judith says, right now I'm paying close attention to things that include children of color. Absolutely, World Homeschoolers Day is all about raising that awareness, diversity, and inclusion. We actually have our book fair that is going on right now, that it's all about books from preschool, actually birth through high school, to try to encourage that. That's a great initiative, Judith. Everyone should have that initiative. Thanks for sharing there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, we can move forward. I don't see any other questions as of now. So Brian, you want to share the second half, 3 tips for teaching literature?
Sure. Let me address Anonymous's question quickly, if that's okay. Sure. And then I'll move on to the literature stuff. So I want to talk to you more actually about what particularly the problem is with your 9-year-old. It sounds like, at least, that the problem is just the matter of expectations, right? What should I be expecting of a 9-year-old? And that can be, I could imagine that's a difficult transition, working with college level students, and then having to drop down to a 9-year-old. Obviously, you got to lower your bar a whole lot. Here's my advice, though, and I tell this to every parent. For me, this is my perspective on teaching parenting etc. And it's just simply this: is I try to think of what's the worst way to mess this up. Let's assume I'm going to mess this up. How do I want to mess it up, right? And what I've come to believe is that it's the mistake that's way easier to fix is to overdo the positive feedback and encouragement, right? Some people think, oh, if I'm just encouraging them all the time, then they're not going to learn, the rules. They're not going to be able to correct their mistakes. If I'm just being all positive all the time. I'm like, okay, that's true, I guess, but that seems to me like a much better problem to have than the student who's just frustrated and discouraged because all you do is mark stuff up and correct things. So my advice to most parents with their students writing is to ease up on the correction and overdo the encouragement. And if you're teaching college students, you're going to see this with them too. I'm sure you have. It's just what I said before. Students who believe in themselves, even if they're not good writers, if they think they're a good writer, they soak up everything you tell them. They're easy to teach once they believe in themselves. And I think a huge problem is students just are terrified at the difficulty of writing. There's so much complexity to the task of writing. To have interesting, complete thoughts in our brains, and then to find the words to represent them. And then, when you're 9, even just, manipulating a pencil, to write the words can be difficult for a student. And then, all the rules of spelling and punctuation and grammar, and it can be really overwhelming for students. So ease up, encourage, make sure you understand that, make sure that you believe in them as writers, and get them to believe in themselves as writers. I believe this is true. I believe we live by this policy at WriteAtHome, and that's that every student that comes to us is already a writer. But there's a writer in there. There's a voice and a perspective that's unique to them. And our job is just to help that emerge, to clear the debris away so that that writer can come out, right? That it's already in there. And that sort of positive belief, pointing out, look what you did. This is fantastic. This is an amazing sentence. They wouldn't have noticed it if you hadn't pointed it out, right? This kind of thing, I think, is absolutely more important than, correcting the, whether it's has an apostrophe or not, or there, and there, and making sure they get those things straight. Like that'll come in time, right? Make them believe in themselves, and you're going to make progress. The rest of the stuff is going to be easy. If they believe in themselves as writers, then everything about writing is going to get easier. So focus there. That would be what I would say. All right, let's get to the literature stuff. The question about what books to pick. So there's so many ways. I love lists. I'm a big list guy. I actually will read books. I'll find a great list and say, okay, I've read these, but I haven't read all of them, and I'll go back through it and I'll try to find them. So I love lists. I've used lists in creating curriculum for students. Years and years ago, I used Susan Wise Bauer's book, The Well-Trained Mind, and her recommended reading list at the back was sort of the foundation of the classical curriculum that I started teaching in literature. Over time, very quickly, I began adjusting and modifying that. So I wasn't sort of strictly limited to it, but it was a good place to start. But let me talk about the 3 things about literature. I absolutely love teaching literature. I started teaching homeschoolers literature courses back in the early 1990s in a live co-op setting. And I've developed curriculum over time that's sort of a great books oriented thing. And we moved that to an online format using Zoom 6 years ago. Yes, I used Zoom before COVID. It did exist before COVID, believe it or not. And here's some things that we believe about teaching literature in particular. The first principle is the principle of enjoyment before analysis, or enjoyment through analysis, which I'll talk about in just a second. The second one is it's all about the books, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. And the third one is kids can handle harder books than you think. Kids can handle more than you think. Those are my 3 things I've learned over the years of teaching literature to kids. So 1, enjoyment before analysis. I've run across people over time who really fight the idea of literary analysis. They've got this bad taste in their mouth, I think from bad teachers over the years, frankly. This idea that if you are analyzing a work of literature, then you're somehow putting it under a microscope. You're studying it in some sort of alien way that takes the joy out of the reading experience. I've come across lots of parents over time who will proudly tell me, I don't do literary analysis. I want my kids to enjoy the book. That's all that matters to me. And what I tell them, well, one time I told them this very bluntly and I regretted it later. So I became more adept at communicating this. But what I said one time to a mom was like, we don't do analysis because I want my kids to enjoy the books. And what I said was, well, I think you're doing it wrong. I'm convinced of it, that if literary analysis is decreasing your students' enjoyment of a book, then you're doing it wrong. I fully believe that literary analysis, when done right, springs out of enjoyment of a book. It's a part of enhancing the pleasure and enjoyment that comes from reading. That's what good literary analysis does. So we have to get the priorities correct, right? I absolutely agree with moms who say, I want my kids to enjoy the book. Of course, especially if we're talking about works of literature, novels and short stories and poetry. All of these things were created to delight us, to inspire us, to provoke us, to give us pleasure, maybe to make us think and to challenge us, sure, but also to attract us and win us over, right? Nobody writes a novel thinking, oh, I just hope one day, some high school student will have to study this in their 10th grade classroom. That's not why we do it. One day, I hope a teacher will use my book to teach the concept of symbolism in a class. Nobody thinks that, right? So let's get it right. Absolutely, the idea of teaching literature is to provoke and delight and enhance the life of our kids. That's why great books are written, right? To make our lives better and more pleasurable. And so if that's not doing that, then back off the literary analysis, right? We don't need to be filling out worksheets on the things that our students are reading. Here's what literary analysis is, okay? This is a great example of literary analysis. Years and years ago, I was teaching literature, and there was a young Navy guy in my church, and really sharp guy who loved to read. And I recommended a book to him one day, and I still remember this. I was cutting my grass. It was the summertime. I was outside cutting grass, and this dude comes racing down my suburban street in his car, way faster than he should have been driving. And he slams on his brakes outside my house, sees me cutting the grass, and he jumps out of the car with the book that I had recommended. And he's like, I need to talk to you about this book right now. And I laughed and I was like, what are you talking about? He goes, dude, I love this book, but there's things I don't understand and I need to talk to you about it. And I was like, well, chill out, bro. This guy was like 24 and really enthusiastic. I'd love to meet with you. So let's just schedule a time to, we'll go hang out and we'll talk about the book, but I'm cutting my grass right now, relax. And so what we did was we met and we talked about the parts of the book that he loved and the stuff that he wasn't sure about. And he's trying to figure out what it meant. And I'm offering some suggestions, and we did literary analysis, but it wasn't because it was required. It was because this guy was gripped by this book and wanted to figure some things out. He was desperate for it in a way that made talking about it really fun. We ended up from that meeting creating our first men's book club that has been meeting now for 20 plus years as just a bunch of guys that would get together. And we were committed from the beginning to do a book club a guy's way, this very stereotypical masculine approach to reading books. So it involved beer and pizza and arguing. We were determined that if we all just agreed on the book and liked it together, that was a lousy meeting, that the good ones were when we were shouting and insulting one another. And it's been a joy to be a part of that group for years. They're some of my very best friends. And that's what literary analysis should do, right? Make us thrilled with the book. Here's what literary analysis starts with. It's, why do I love this book so much? That's the question at the heart of literary analysis. I love this book. Why do I love this book, but this one is just kind of right? What's the difference? that question is why we do literary analysis, because this analysis both ways. It can show this is why this book is excellent and outstanding. It can also show why this book isn't. This is lacking in some areas, right? So those are the questions that we should be asking. I believe that literary analysis always begins with, well, what'd you think? Did you like it? And if they say, yeah, then you say, what'd you like? And here's the thing. Students who haven't been educated in literary analysis don't really know what to say. And what literary analysis does is it gives them terminology. It gives them some paradigms. It gives them some ways of thinking that now enable them to articulate what was good about a book, right? And then what it does is, as they become readers and begin reading more and more, they begin to recognize similarities in characterization and plot and tone and theme, and they can begin making comparisons and doing sort of comparative analysis, thinking about books in terms of their context and connection to other books. And then it gets really fun, right? And you'll see this, you'll experience this yourself too. The delight comes sometimes, the intellectual delight, right? Of discovering something in a book, of figuring out why a character exists, seeing some connection that you didn't see before. And maybe somebody else tells it to you, or you discover it for yourself and you get super excited about it. That's literary analysis. Okay. So let me talk about terms, literary terms. Here's a mistake that lots of textbooks make and high school classroom teachers make, is they think that the point of a textbook, right, is to use literature in order to teach literary concepts. That's what I mean by it's about the books. Okay. Switch that around. Yes, we have to teach kids literary terms. They need to know what the climax is, and they need to know what flat characters and round characters are, and they need to know about theme and symbolism and conflict and the different kinds of conflict. All those things are good terms we need to teach. But the point isn't to teach them the terms, right? The point is that they're developing concepts that will help them better appreciate the books. So don't use literature to teach terms. Teach terms to help kids appreciate the literature, like learn to value and appreciate the literature. It should be in the context of enjoying the books, right? And seeing the world from a new way. So that's absolutely vital, is get those things right. So also what I mean by it's all about the books is your time should be primarily invested in the reading of the books. This is why homeschooling is at such an advantage over classroom instruction, right? We're in a classroom. I taught in a classroom for 10 years, public school classroom, where my day was very rigidly structured. I had 50 minutes with kids 5 days a week, or then a block schedule. I had 90 minutes, 3 days or 2 days a week, right? Whatever it was. But it was this rigid set of time. I had to fill up that time with effective teaching stuff, right? And then maybe I had to assign some homework, but that had to be limited because kids are really busy. They only have so much time at home to do homework. What that meant was, when it comes to literature, is we never ran anything. Like, we'd read some poetry in class. We'd read a play through with, kids acting out the parts. Occasionally, short stories, maybe. Occasionally, we would read a novel, a short novel that we could sort of read piece by piece during part of a class every day. But honestly, like, we would complete a full school year and read just a handful of actual books. And I just thought, man, we're not even giving kids chances to, how do you teach literature when you're not reading? So when I escaped the structure of a classroom and was able to kind of create my own approach to it, like we do at WriteAtHome, I flipped that entirely upside down, so that with a WriteAtHome literature class, we meet for 1 hour each week to talk about what they're reading. And the other 4 hours of the week are for reading, meaning, 1 hour a day for 5 days a week. So 1 hour of talking about the reading, and the other 4 hours or so actually reading. As a result, with WriteAtHome, kids read 12 to 15 full books every year. And we're not talking the short books. We're not talking about like The Outsiders, although we do that too. I'm talking about Moby Dick and Don Quixote and Shakespearean plays and Paradise Lost, and like great works of literature that are sometimes very large and time consuming. And we knock these out. These kids read a massive amount, because the emphasis is on the right place. It's on the books. It's not my ideas about the books. It's not the terminology about the books. It's actually the books. So listen, if you don't do any literary analysis, if you don't do any instruction, if you just point kids toward good books and let them read them, I mean, that's not ideal. I think you want something in addition to that. But if that's all you can do, you're still killing it. Your kids are reading great books. That's where it's going to come from. That needs to be the focus in any kind of really, really wise literature program. All right. And then hold on, I lost my picture. What was my third one? Oh yeah, kids can handle more than you think. That's the other one. So years and years ago, I started doing this sort of great books thing. And I was worried that the books were going to be over everybody's head. You know, I'm asking too much of these kids. I had some really, really sharp kids. So I thought I'd give it a shot. But deep down, I wondered, and maybe they're just exceptional and normal kids can't really do it. I have just never regretted going a great book way and asking kids to read really difficult works of literature like Paradise Lost and The Inferno by Dante, and lots of Shakespeare, The Fairy Queen by Spencer, and Faulkner when they get into their senior year, and really, really difficult works of literature even. Some of the great books you'll find are not nearly as hard as you would imagine. The Iliad and the Odyssey, they're alien, they're kind of weird stories because they're so old, but they're not hard to figure out what's going on, generally speaking. And the other beautiful thing is there's tons of free resources these days, especially when it comes to those kind of great classic works. 2 fantastic websites, if you don't already have these for middle and high school age kids, you absolutely need to. And even not just for your students, just for yourself. One is called SparkNotes, sparknotes.com, all one word, sparknotes.com. And the other one was a spin-off of sparknotes.com. Some of the people that created SparkNotes went on to create a similar competitive website called litcharts.com, litcharts. Both of them are free and fantastic. Both of them also have paid services that they will constantly be pitching to you, and ads that they will run on there because they are for profit. But it's worth it because the free stuff that they provide are fantastic. Summaries, detailed chapter summaries of every great book and every book you would ever think to study generally in a high school. Poetry, they'll look at, they do amazing stuff that will help students get through even really difficult works of literature. And here's the secret. These are also the tool that you need if you can't keep up with the reading that you're giving your kids, right? This is a constant problem, right? My kids are reading more than I can. I can't keep up with all the reading my kids are doing. How am I supposed to help them if I can't read the book? SparkNotes, you get to cheat. Your kids don't. They have to read the book. You can go to SparkNotes and read the summary. And it's a wonderful summary. Not just summary, it's also analysis. It will give you analysis right there to help you. And it's a wonderful tool for teachers. Outstanding. So make sure you make use of both of those. But don't be afraid to teach even really difficult stuff. You'll be amazed how much easier it is to grasp than you would imagine. And the challenge, this is what I tell my kids, the challenge is really where growth comes from. All right, here's the 4th point I'm going to throw in there. Reading skills don't end with literacy. Okay. We have this weird, we use this term literacy a lot, and it's a weird term because it sort of implies that there's like people who can read, they're literate, and people who can't read, those are non-literate. The truth is it's a spectrum. It's a very blurred spectrum between not reading and reading really well. Just because you can sound out the words doesn't mean you're a good reader, right? And I think we kind of get to this point where like, oh, my kid can read, so I'm done teaching reading. I mean, okay, you're done teaching reading, but you're not done teaching literature skills, critical thinking, literary analysis skills. Like becoming a good reader, it's kind of like writing skills. It continues to grow and evolve over time. We want our students to be able to tackle really difficult books with some level of confidence and comprehension, right? That takes time and practice. It doesn't end when your kids get out of, 3rd grade and they're reading books on their own. They're reading chapter books on their own. They continue to grow as readers, and they have to think that way too. Help them to see we're always getting better at reading. I'm always getting better at reading. I'm better at poetry analysis than I was, 10 years ago because I've worked hard at it, etc. Right. So keep that stuff in mind. And the way you grow, by the way, is to be challenged. This is what I tell the kids. I said, look, I've run 3 marathons. I'll never do it again because my last one was a bad experience. But I got to the point where I could run a marathon, over a long period of time. I ran 2 miles when I got started running. That was the best I could do. And I just was determined to get better. And so I just kept incrementally increasing the amount of running I was doing. And I studied up on it. What I realized is when you do that, your body physically transforms. As you push your body to excel, to run a little bit further every time, your body actually grows new capillaries. Millions of new capillaries begin to grow to get energy to your muscles more efficiently as a result of you pushing yourself. This happens as you keep pushing over time, right? So it's not like you just get more psychologically capable. Your body changes until you're able to run much further distances than you were before. That only happens when you continue to increase the amount of distance that you do. Same thing with weight training, right? If you always do the same amount of weights, you never get stronger. You have to continually increase that weight incrementally so that your muscles are taking on more and more strain, and that causes them to change so that you can accommodate more and you get bigger muscles and get stronger, right? Your brain works the same way. If we're always reading books that are easy for us to comprehend, that don't challenge us, we're never going to improve. We're never going to move toward greater literacy. So I tell kids all the time, they're like, Mr. Wasko, this book is hard. And I'm like, I know, it's intentionally hard. It's over my head. It's too hard for me. I'm like, I know it is. It is too hard for you. And that's how you're going to get better at reading. Because if you always read books that are not too hard for you, you're never going to get better. So I'm going to challenge you to read harder books, and you watch how you'll understand way more than you think. And I'm going to help you. You know, I'm your spotter when you're lifting weights. You know, I'm not going to let the barbell drop on you and crush you, right? I'm here. I'm going to give you that little extra help to get there. But as a result, we're going to get stronger together and get better at reading. So don't be afraid of challenging them to read hard books. Okay. The last thing I'm going to say about this is, just like with writing, right? We want students to love reading. So a lot of it has to be, you know, delight driven and encouraging them to love it. And that's what's most important, and not all kinds of extra projects related to the writing that's just making them to rote work. It's just, man, but aren't books great, right? We want them to love books. So sometimes that means choosing books, right, that our kids are going to enjoy. Again, there's always balance. If we just give them things they like all the time, they're going to be very limited and narrow, and they're only ever going to read whatever fantasy fiction, never anything else, right? So we need to challenge them to expand that a little bit, but delight and pleasure has got to be a priority. So accommodate that. Forget the book lists, right? If they're struggling, they don't really love reading, but they find some book that really engages them, encourage that, and then look for other stuff along the same lines and engage them in conversation about, why they like that book and not others, right? I've got kids who just hate poetry. And I'm like, come on, man, quit being closed-minded. Poetry is awesome, but I don't make them do it. I'm like, all right, you don't have to like it. You have to read some of it, but it's fine. You don't have to like it. But I want them to love stuff, right? I've always said, if I can get kids to love reading good books, my job is done. I don't care if I don't teach them a single concept. If I get them to love reading good books, they're going to leave my class and they'll read for the rest of their life. And they're going to learn way more from Milton and Twain and Dickens and Faulkner and Hemingway than they will ever from Wasko, So if I can introduce them to those guys, then we're in good shape. All right.
You just laid it all out there. And you gave us bonus tips too. Thanks for that.
I gave you a fourth.
Yeah. So much good information. So many things stand out. Before I share the things that stood out for me, I would love to open up the Q&A section to the viewers. The anonymous viewer, Brian, answered your question somewhat. If there's some other information you'd like to share, please come back and put it there. Anyone else, please ask any questions in the Q&A. Brian will answer them as long as we have time for that. In the meantime, I'll just share some things that stood out from what you were saying. Really, what I took from it is like the passion and the emotions that you feel from a book are important, and they assist you in those questions, that analysis of the literature. I mean, those are the points. Your response to them is where it starts. And I never really thought about it right like that, but that is so true, because you'll run and talk about the best book and you'll run and talk about the worst book. And that is, you think literary analysis is something separate from the conversations about the book, but it's pretty much the same with obviously some academic terms in there.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that stood out to me was saying teach the terms. Oh wait, how did you put it? Don't use literature to teach the terms. Teach the terms to use the terms to teach literature.
Right.
Yeah, that's it's just like what we were talking about, the process of writing. It's about your voice first, and then you can come in and refine it. So yeah, and again, if you have any questions, please put them in chat. Looks like, or the Q&A. Sabrina says, thank you so much, Brian. The webinar has been so informative and inspiring. I agree. Absolutely. Anyone else? We have a couple more questions, a couple more minutes for questions. If you have anything or just anything to say, please drop it in there.
Yeah, Anonymous has a question there. Just got another one.
Oh, it just popped up. All right. How to encourage a love of reading for a 6-year-old who seemingly hates to read?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, probably a boy. Yeah, no worries. Okay. Again, first, normal, right? Don't ever make a kid feel like he's some weirdo. There's some problem because he hates to read. Sympathy, right? Sympathy, empathy. It's just simply not a natural love for a lot of kids, right? So I would say lots of positive reinforcement, right? You're not going to force a kid to start liking something that they don't. Second is share your love with him a lot, right? With a 6-year-old, find books to read together. Absolutely. Reading aloud can be huge. Make it, a regular thing. It can be short. If they get really bored, don't feel like you have to invest tons of time to it, but find something that they're going to really like and read it together. Talk about it, enjoy it. Some of my fondest memories of being a dad, and my kids will back this up, were the reading times together when they were little. We would read before bedtime for them most of the time. And of course, reading before bedtime is a really good idea because kids don't want to go to bed. And so if you can associate like reading with staying up, this is better than going to sleep. They'll get you, can you read me a little more? Can you read a little bit more? Right. Because they're delaying the sleep thing. That's just a positive thing. It creates this positive association with kids related to books. Do audiobooks is another thing. Find books on audio. They can be really wonderful, and kids can really engage with them on trips and in cars and stuff like that. I think the most important thing, honestly, is that your kids see you reading on your own, right? Be reading as much as you can, so that you're modeling that sort of love for stuff as you go, and encourage it. But again, just understand, there's just sometimes you just have to be really patient. You can't manufacture motivation in other people. I've just found you can encourage it, you can try to model it, and then hope for the best, they're going to somehow connect and pick up on it. You just can't force it, right? It's counterproductive.
Yeah, that's so true. Great advice. I'm glad you said that about audiobooks. People like to poo-poo audiobooks, but I'm like, all I could do was have audiobooks at a portion of my life and as an adult. So
I read books aloud a lot, right? Mm-hmm. There's certain books that I love to hear so well that I literally will just read out loud. What's the difference, right? Someone else who's really good at it reading it to you. I don't see, and actually they've done brain studies, and they're listening to a book being read and reading a book yourself triggers the same exact parts of the brain. There doesn't seem to be any kind of difference in terms of how your brain functions. So audiobooks are fine. I don't have any issue with those at all.
Go for it. Absolutely.
Helps you get more books in, right?
Yeah, you can be doing a couple at a time, actually. Ask me how I know. So Leslie says, excellent info. Thanks so much. And then Anonymous, the English professor, is just talking about graphic novels. And let me just say, the only thing my 11-year-old will read are graphic novels. He's just not into anything else. And just as a personal experience, great. And they will eventually, I find a lot, and you can talk about this briefly too, Brian, but that is a great gateway into chapter books and all types of other books. So
right. So yeah, her question is, how do you transition from graphic
right.
novels? I would just say I wouldn't be in a hurry to transition. Like if they're reading graphic novels, they're getting hooked on books. And honestly, I'm like every other old school English teacher, and I would poo-poo those in the beginning. But the more I'm looking into them, the more I'm realizing it's its own art form. That's a blend of visual art and literature, and it's a legitimate art that we need to begin to recognize. Some graphic novels are really, really well done, and I don't think we need to be suggesting that one day you're going to move on to real books. Just get out of that mentality and begin to embrace this idea as a new form, and just trust the process. I think you're going to see they'll begin to transition on their own into regular books, but
absolutely,
I wouldn't be in a hurry to transition, I think.
Yeah, I love that. Don't be in a hurry, and to make sure that reading is happening, and that's the point. That's what you want.
Yeah.
So excellent. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and Brian for being here. Can you tell our viewers a little bit more about how they could get connected with WriteAtHome, get their kids on board?
Happy to. So WriteAtHome offers online writing classes and online literature classes. And the principles that I've talked about today are how we run our business. And the literature classes are the high school and middle school literature classes are taught by yours truly. I'm the live teacher. To date, we have classes for 4th and 5th graders as well. I have a teacher that does the elementary school. She's fantastic. Better than me, honestly. And I have a history teacher that we recently brought on who's also just incredible, Mike Napier, and he's offering some history classes as well. So a wide variety of things in that area. We originally were just writing, thus WriteAtHome. We added literature, and then very recently added history courses that sort of tie into our literature study. We're really excited about this new direction. You can find out more about us at writeathome.com, and it's spelled WRITE at home.com. There's plenty of information there. We've got a wonderful staff of customer care who will happy to answer any questions that you have by phone or email. So please feel free to reach out. And I'll just leave it there. There's lots more I could say, obviously, about WriteAtHome, but we've been working with homeschool young people for 22 years now. It's amazing. Since 2001. It's been a joy.
And I absolutely recommend them. I'm a homeschool mom who my oldest teenager uses the product. So absolutely spot on. You'll love it. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and for Brian to be here and sharing all your knowledge and wisdom. I just want to let you know that this session will be available on our World Homeschoolers Day YouTube channel within the next day or so. So if you missed something and you got those websites you want to get to, all that will be on the replay. Also, don't forget tomorrow's session with Takara Marzette from not World Homeschoolers Day. She's a sponsor from Reconstruction. She's going to be talking about windows, mirrors, and sliding doors, an invitation to unapologetic history. That is going to be a great session to check into. Also, look for the link to that talk in your inbox tomorrow morning. So thanks again for everyone being here. We appreciate you showing up, and be sure to go over to WriteAtHome and check out their classes for the fall and all year. Excellent information. Thanks again, Brian, for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
All right.